My deadbeat brother spent years partying while I transformed Dad's failing company into a $150 million empire. At the shareholders meeting, he had me fired and humiliated. I left quietly. Hey Reddit, you ever have one of those moments where everything in your life feels like it's hanging by a thread? That's where I was 10 years ago, staring at a mess I didn't create but couldn't ignore. Let me backtrack a bit. My dad built this company from nothing. He was brilliant at what he did, but managing money? Not so much. By the time I was 26, fresh out of business school, the company was bleeding money. My dad looked 10 years older than he was, buried under stress, and my older brother, Adam, wasn't helping. Adam was 31 at the time, and while I was busting my ass learning about supply chains and financial models, he was, let's just say, living it up. He had this effortless charm that made him the favorite. Always had, always would. I knew that wasn't new, but it still stung. The wake-up call came one night when I found my dad sitting in his office, surrounded by stacks of unpaid invoices and contracts that were going nowhere. He didn't even notice me walk in. His desk looked like a disaster zone, and he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. When he finally noticed me, he said, "I think it's over, son. I don't know how to fix this." That hit me harder than I expected. I don't know if it was the weight of his words or the realization that everything he worked for might collapse, but something inside me just clicked. I told him I'd handle it. I don't know if he believed me at the time, but he didn't argue. Honestly, I think he was just relieved someone was stepping up. From that moment, I practically lived at the office. I learned every detail about how the company worked, or, more accurately, how it wasn't working. I got familiar with the numbers, renegotiated contracts, and talked to every client who'd walked through the door. A lot of them didn't want to hear from me. I was young, inexperienced, and they'd already lost trust in us. I can't tell you how many times I got told no or had doors shut in my face, but I just kept showing up. People noticed that, even the ones who didn't like me much started to take me seriously after a while. The first year was brutal. I was pulling 16-hour days minimum. My dad was still technically running things, but he left most of the decisions to me. I cut unnecessary spending left and right. That included some of Adam's more indulgent expenses. He had this thing where he'd charge personal stuff to the company account, and no one ever stopped him. I stopped it. He didn't take that well. I still remember him showing up at the office one day, just to laugh at me. "Look at you playing CEO," he said. "Don't get too comfortable. Dad will never let you have it." I ignored him like always. I knew how this game worked. Adam was the favorite. He always got the credit for things he didn't do and the benefit of the doubt when he screwed up. But I wasn't doing this for approval. I was doing it because I couldn't let my dad's work go down the drain. By the end of that year, things started to turn around. We weren't thriving yet, but we weren't drowning either. Slowly, we started building a reputation again. Clients began to come back. Employees started to trust that their jobs weren't on the chopping block, and the company was actually making money. It wasn't a lot, but it was something. Here's the thing about success, though. It doesn't fix everything. My dad was proud of the progress we'd made, but in his eyes, Adam could do no wrong. No matter how much I accomplished, Adam was always his golden boy. At family dinners, my dad would talk about Adam's business sense, even though Adam was barely around. Meanwhile, I was crunching numbers and planning expansion strategies while everyone else was talking about vacation. It wasn't fair, but life rarely is. I decided pretty early on that I didn't need the credit. If Adam wanted to take all the praise, fine. I had bigger goals in mind. My dad's approval would have been nice, sure, but what mattered to me was making the company something worth being proud of, something sustainable, something I could look at and say, yeah, I did that. In the years that followed, the company transformed. We started offering new services, developed some tech solutions that set us apart, and expanded into markets we never thought we could reach. Revenue grew steadily, from scraping by to hitting 8 figures and eventually crossing into 9. It was surreal watching something that was once on the brink of collapse turn into an industry leader. I should have felt on top of the world, but there was always this undercurrent of tension. Adam. He wasn't as absent anymore. As the company became more successful, he started popping up at the office more often, acting like he was an integral part of the operation. Everyone knew better, but no one said anything. Not even Dad. Looking back, I think that was the first sign that something was off. Adam didn't like that the spotlight wasn't entirely on him anymore. He'd joke about how I was too serious or needed a life outside the office, but behind those jokes, there was this edge to him, like he was gearing up for something. I didn't know what, but I could feel it. Still, I kept my head down and focused on the work. I wasn't about to let his insecurities derail what I'd spent years building. Or so I thought. I underestimated him. That was my first mistake. By the time we hit $150 million in revenue, the cracks were already starting to show. I just didn't realize how deep they were. I knew something was off the second Dad called for the shareholder meeting. It wasn't like he'd never gathered us before, but this one felt different. The way he phrased it, a significant announcement about the company's future, had a finality to it. I figured it was about his retirement. After all, he'd been talking about stepping back for years now, especially after the company had stabilized. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was ready. I'd been running the company for years in all but title, and this meeting seemed like a formality to make it official. I'd worked my ass off for this. I wasn't looking for a pat on the back, but I figured this was the natural progression. Who else would take over? Adam showed up late, of course. That was classic Adam. I was already at the boardroom table, going over my notes for the presentation I'd prepared, when he strolled in like he didn't have a care in the world. He was all smiles, shaking hands, cracking jokes. Everyone loved him. That's the thing about Adam. You'd almost forget that he'd never done anything to earn the respect he got. He just had this way of making people feel like he belonged, even when he didn't. He gave me a wink as he sat down, and something about it made my stomach turn. Not because I was scared, Adam had never been a real threat, but because it felt calculated. I brushed it off. No sense in letting my imagination run wild before the meeting even started. Dad walked in a few minutes later, looking tired but determined. He gave his usual spiel about the company's history, how much it meant to him, and how proud he was of what we'd achieved. It was a bit over the top, but that was Dad. He liked to set the stage before dropping the big news. When he finally got to the point, he stood up, adjusted his glasses, and said, "It's time for me to pass the torch." He paused, looking around the room like he was waiting for applause or something. After much consideration, I've decided that Adam will be the new CEO. I swear, time stopped for a second. My brain refused to process what I just heard. Adam? CEO? Surely, this was a mistake. I looked at Adam, and he was grinning ear to ear. Not surprised, not caught off guard grinning. That's when it hit me. He'd known all along. I didn't have time to dwell on it, because Dad kept going. "I believe Adam embodies the leadership qualities this company needs to move forward," he said. Leadership qualities? The guy who could barely show up to meetings on time? The guy whose biggest contribution to the company was draining the entertainment budget for years? Before I could say anything, Adam stood up, holding a folder. "I'd like to take a moment to address something important," he said, his tone all businesslike, which was laughable coming from him. He opened the folder and started flipping through pages, making a big show of it. "Over the past few months," he began, "I've come across some troubling discrepancies in the way certain decisions have been made." He glanced at me, then at the board members, as if he was trying to gauge their reactions. "It appears that my brother has been operating outside his authority." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He went on to accuse me of making unauthorized deals, overstepping my role, and jeopardizing the company's reputation. He painted a picture of me as this reckless, power-hungry figure who'd been running wild while Dad was distracted. It was all so carefully worded, just vague enough to sound plausible without offering any real evidence. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Dad cut me off. "Let him finish," he said, his voice calm but firm. Adam wrapped up his little performance by saying, "I only bring this up because I care deeply about the company's future, and I want to ensure we maintain the highest level of integrity." Integrity? Coming from Adam? The irony was almost too much to handle. By the time he was done, the room was silent. All eyes were on Dad, who took a deep breath before saying, "After reviewing the situation, I've decided to terminate Marcus's employment, effective immediately." And just like that, my world came crashing down. Security guards appeared out of nowhere, standing by the door like they were waiting for the signal to drag me out. I didn't fight it. I didn't even say anything. What was there to say? The decision had been made long before this meeting, and I'd walked right into their trap. As I gathered my things, Adam leaned over and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "Nothing personal, little brother. Just business." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about the company. This was about improving something. To me, to Dad, to everyone who'd ever compared us. He didn't care about the company's future. He cared about taking it from me. I walked out of that boardroom with as much dignity as I could muster, but inside, I was boiling. Not just because I'd been blindsided, but because Adam had managed to turn years of hard work into a weapon against me. He hadn't just taken the job. He'd taken the narrative. By the time I got in my car, my phone was already blowing up. Texts from colleagues, friends, even a few board members who were shocked by what had happened. I ignored them all. I needed to think. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs. Looking back, they were all there. Adam showing up at the office more often. Dad being unusually secretive. Even the way some of the board members had been acting distant lately. I'd been so focused on running the company that I hadn't seen the storm brewing right under my nose. When I got home, I sat in the dark for hours, trying to make sense of it all. How could Dad, the man who'd watched me pour my life into this company, choose Adam? Was it loyalty? Blind favoritism? Or was I just that replaceable in his eyes? Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. I was out, and Adam was in. But here's the thing about Adam. He's good at playing the part, but he's terrible at understanding the stakes. While he was busy celebrating his win, he didn't realize that I wasn't walking away empty-handed. Far from it. I had spent years building more than just a company. I had built leverage. And while they were busy plotting my downfall, they didn't bother to check just how deep my roots ran. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Adam directly. That's what he'd expect. And that's what he wanted. A chance to paint me as bitter and vengeful. No, I was going to do something much smarter. I was going to wait. And when the time came, I was going to remind them all exactly who built this empire in the first place. The first thing I did was reach out to a handful of key people who had stuck with the company through thick and thin. These weren't flashy, high-profile types. They were the backbone of the company, the IT team, a few senior developers, and a couple of managers who had worked alongside me during those brutal early years. I knew they'd take my call because, unlike Adam, I'd actually taken the time to build relationships. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't need to. All I said was that there was a lot going on behind the scenes, and if they trusted me, they should hold off on making any big decisions for a few days. No one asked questions, and no one hesitated. That told me all I needed to know about where their loyalties lay. Next, I turned my attention to the infrastructure. Here's the thing about being the person who rebuilds a company from scratch. where every piece fits. Over the years, I had quietly created a subsidiary company to handle our most valuable assets: intellectual property, client contracts, proprietary software. On paper, it was just a support company meant to streamline operations. In reality, it was the heart of the business, and I own 100% of it. Why hadn't I told anyone about it? Because I knew something like this would happen eventually. Maybe not exactly this, but I always had a feeling that Adam would try to pull some power play. And Dad? Well, let's just say I'd stopped expecting him to have my back a long time ago. With everything in place, I spent the rest of the weekend gathering receipts, metaphorically speaking. I went through years of documentation, emails, contracts, and financial records, compiling evidence of Adam's negligence, mismanagement, and outright shady behavior. Some of it was small stuff, like frivolous spending and missed deadlines. Other things were bigger: side deals with competitors, questionable transactions, and decisions that had put the company at risk. By Sunday night, I had a folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. That wasn't the end game, though. My goal wasn't to destroy Adam outright. That would have been too easy, and honestly, it wouldn't have fixed anything. My goal was to remind everyone, Adam, Dad, the board, why I was the one who had turned the company around in the first place. Monday morning rolled around, and I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because I wanted to watch the fallout in real time. I brewed some coffee, set up my laptop in my home office, and logged into the company's internal network. Yes, I still had access. You'd think a guy like Adam, with all his leadership qualities, would have thought to revoke my credentials immediately. But no. The first thing I did was activate the failsafe I'd built into the system years ago. It wasn't anything malicious, no viruses or anything like that. It was just a little script that redirected all internal communications to a secure server I controlled. Emails, memos, meeting invites, it all flowed through me. Then I turned my attention to Adam's computer. Again, no hacking required. He hadn't even bothered to change his password. It was still the same one he'd been using since college. I uploaded a video file to his desktop and set it to autoplay the moment he logged in. The video was a highlight reel of his worst decisions, complete with timestamps and supporting documents. It wasn't flashy or over the top, just a cold, hard reminder of his incompetence. By 8:15 a.m., the chaos had begun. I watched through the security feed as Adam strolled into the office, looking smug as ever. He sat down at the CEO's desk, powered up his computer, and leaned back in his chair like he owned the place. A second later, the video started playing. At first, he looked confused. Then his face turned red. He slammed the keyboard a couple of times, trying to close the file, but it wouldn't budge. Every screen in his office displayed the same video on loop. Meanwhile, the notifications started. One by one, emails began flooding the inboxes of board members, department heads, and key investors. Each email contained a piece of evidence I'd collected, accompanied by a short explanation of how Adam's actions had hurt the company. I made sure to keep the tone professional. No accusations, just facts. Down in the lobby, federal agents walked in. I had tipped off the authorities about some of Adam's more questionable financial activities, and they were eager to have a chat with him. The cherry on top? An email from the IT department announcing their resignation. They had all signed contracts with my subsidiary and were officially no longer employees of the company. The email ended with a simple line: "We stand with the person who built this company." I watched as Adam tried to keep it together. He called for IT support, but no one answered. He called Dad, but Dad's phone went straight to voicemail. He even tried to call me at one point. I didn't pick up. By mid-morning, the board had convened an emergency meeting. Adam was summoned, and from what I could see on the security feed, it wasn't a friendly chat. I didn't need to hear what was said in that room to know how it ended. By noon, Adam was escorted out of the building. Watching it all unfold, I didn't feel smug or vindicated. If anything, I felt calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. Adam had spent years coasting on charm and manipulation, but when it came down to it, he couldn't back it up. And Dad? Well, he'd made his choice. I had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The game had changed, and for the first time in a long time, I was holding all the cards. It didn't take long for the news to spread. By the afternoon, employees were whispering about federal agents showing up, IT walking out, and the CEO being escorted out of the building. In the age of instant communication, this kind of chaos doesn't stay contained. By the next morning, rumors had turned into headlines. Company scandal rocks leadership team. No names yet, but everyone internally knew who they were talking about. The stock price tanked. It wasn't a gradual drop either, it was a free fall. Investors started pulling out as soon as they realized the company's core assets were no longer under its control. That was by design, of course. The subsidiary I'd created to house all of it had been legally independent for years, and now it was the backbone of my new operation. Adam had inherited a shiny, empty shell. Meanwhile, I kept my head down. I wasn't about to pop up in the middle of this and look like the guy rubbing salt in the wound. I'd already done enough to destabilize Adam's so-called leadership. The next move wasn't about me. It was about the people who actually made the company work. That morning, I sent out an email to all employees. It was short and to the point. Subject: a new opportunity. To all current staff, you've seen the events of the past day. Many of you are probably feeling uncertain about your future. I want you to know that your hard work and dedication haven't gone unnoticed. I'm offering you the opportunity to join a new organization where your contributions will be valued, your jobs will be secure, and you'll be working under leadership that prioritizes innovation and integrity. Your roles and benefits will remain intact, with enhanced support and opportunities for growth. If you're interested, you can find more details here. Link. No pressure. This is entirely your choice. Thank you for everything you've done. You deserve better, and I hope to provide it. Marcus. By the end of the day, my inbox was flooded with replies. People weren't just signing on, they were thanking me for giving them a way out. It was surreal reading messages from folks who had stuck with the company through its darkest times, telling me they believed in me, not the organization that had just imploded. Over 93% of the staff accepted the offer within hours. Adam, on the other hand, wasn't faring so well. By midweek, the investigation into his financial activities had gone public. That's when the real dirt started coming out. Turns out he'd been siphoning money through fake vendor contracts. He'd also been cozying up to competitors, selling them client information in exchange for under-the-table payments. I knew about some of it, but seeing it all laid out in black and white was staggering. The authorities moved quickly. Adam was formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and a list of other offenses. He was released on bail, but his reputation was in shambles. The media had a field day, painting him as the poster child for nepotism gone wrong. Every detail about his antics, the parties, the reckless spending, the backroom deals, was dragged into the spotlight. And then there was Dad. He went radio silent for the first few days, probably trying to process what had just happened. I can only imagine what it felt like, realizing the son he trusted and favored for decades had turned out to be a liability of epic proportions. The board wasn't spared either. The investors who'd stuck around demanded answers, and the remaining members were scrambling to do damage control. But what could they say? The foundation of the company had been ripped out from under them. Everything that made the business valuable was now part of my new operation. That week, I held a meeting with the leadership team of my new company. These were the people who'd followed me out of the chaos, the IT director, the head of operations, a few key managers, and the core development team. We sat around a conference table in the new office space I'd quietly secured months earlier. It wasn't flashy, just a functional, modern setup with enough room to grow. First order of business, I said, is making sure everyone feels stable here. No surprises, no gimmicks. We've all been through enough of that. Heads nodded around the table. I could see the relief in their faces. For years, they've been caught in the crossfire of bad decisions and favoritism. Now they had a chance to do their work without the constant fear of what Adam might screw up next. The transition wasn't without its hiccups. There were legal hurdles, as expected, and a few clients needed extra reassurance that this was the right move. But overall, things went smoother than I'd anticipated. By the end of the month, we were fully operational, and I was finally able to breathe a little. Meanwhile, the original company continued its downward spiral. With no assets, no leadership, and no clear path forward, it became a cautionary tale in the business world. The stock price, which had been artificially inflated by years of hype, was now worth pennies. Investors bailed, lawsuits piled up, and the remaining employees scrambled to find other jobs. Adam, predictably, tried to spin the narrative in his favor. He gave an interview to a local paper, claiming he'd been set up and that the investigation was politically motivated. It didn't land. By that point, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and even Dad didn't come to his defense publicly. Justice, in this case, wasn't about destroying Adam. It was about accountability. For too long, he'd been leaving other people to clean up his messes. This time, there was no one left to bail him out. By the time the dust settled, the message was clear. Leadership isn't about titles or favoritism. It's about doing the work, earning trust, and taking responsibility. Adam had failed at all three, and now he was paying the price. As for me, I wasn't focused on revenge or gloating. I was focused on building something new, something that wouldn't be tied to the mistakes of the past. The fallout had been messy, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the only way to fix something broken is to tear it down and start over. A week after Adam's public downfall, I got the call I knew was coming. It wasn't from Adam, though, it was from Dad. He'd been keeping his distance ever since everything went sideways, but I figured it was only a matter of time before he reached out. The message he left on my phone was short and to the point. We need to talk. Your mother and I are coming to see you tomorrow. I didn't reply. What was there to say? I knew exactly why he was calling. It wasn't to apologize, and it definitely wasn't to admit he'd made a mistake. No, this was about the fallout, the tank stock price, the lawsuits, the investors bailing, and the fact that his entire retirement fund was now tied up in a company that was circling the drain. The next morning, right on time, Dad and Mom showed up at the office of my new company. I had deliberately kept the location low-key, but I wasn't trying to hide. They found me easily enough. When they walked in, it hit me how much they'd aged in just a few weeks. Dad looked like he hadn't slept in days, and Mom, well, she looked like she'd been crying a lot. They both sat across from me in the small conference room, the tension so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Dad was the first to speak. Marcus, he began, his voice strained, you've made your point, but we need to figure out how to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Fix what exactly? I asked. The mess Adam made? The company you let him destroy? Or the fact that your retirement fund is worthless? Mom flinched, and Dad's face tightened. This isn't the time for blame, he said, trying to keep his composure. We're family. We need to come together and figure this out. I almost laughed. Now you wanted to talk about family? After years of letting Adam walk all over me? After firing me in the most humiliating way possible? Now he was interested in unity? You don't get to play the family card now, Dad, I said, keeping my tone even. You made it pretty clear where your loyalty lies. He sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. I didn't know what Adam was doing, he said. Didn't you? I shot back. You might not have known the details, but you knew he wasn't qualified. You knew he was spending money he shouldn't have been. You knew he wasn't showing up half the time, and you let him take over anyway. Mom started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said, shaking my head. You don't get to defend him either. You both made this bed. Now you want me to clean it up? There was a long silence. Finally, Dad said, your mother and I are in a bad spot. Everything we've saved is tied up in that company. If we don't figure something out, we could lose the house. And there was the real reason for this. It wasn't about Adam or the company. It was about money. I took a deep breath, leaning forward on the table. I'm going to help you, I said. Relief washed over their faces, but I wasn't done. Here's how it's going to work, I continued. I'll buy your shares in the company at their original value. That'll give you enough to keep the house and retire comfortably. But there are conditions. Dad frowned. What kind of conditions? First, I said, you both sign a non-disclosure agreement. That means no talking to anyone, friends, family, reporters about what happened with Adam or the company. Second, you retire quietly. No more meddling, no more trying to fix things. And third, the money comes with strings attached. You'll get a monthly allowance, and any major expenses have to be approved by a trustee. Mom looked like she wanted to protest, but Dad put a hand on her arm. That seems extreme, he said carefully. Extreme? I repeated, leaning back in my chair. Dad, this is me being generous. I don't owe you anything. After everything that's happened, I could have walked away and left you to deal with the mess you made. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because, deep down, I still care about this family, even if you don't deserve it. That last line hit harder than I expected. For a second, I thought Dad was going to argue, but then he nodded slowly. Fine, he said. We'll sign whatever you need us to sign. Mom looked at him wide-eyed. Leonard, it's the best we're going to get, he said, cutting her off. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow. Once you've signed, the funds will be transferred within 48 hours. They stood too, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. This was the man who'd always told me to take responsibility, to own my mistakes, to be better. And here he was, broken and defeated, asking for a bailout from the son he'd overlooked for years. As they left, Dad turned back and said, "You're a better man than I gave you credit for." I didn't respond. Words didn't mean much to me anymore. Not from him. When the door closed behind them, I sat back down and stared at the table for a long time. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. It didn't feel like a victory at all, but it was necessary. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good. It just feels like closure. The day my parents signed the papers, I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. Just a strange kind of emptiness. It was done. They had agreed to the terms, and the money was on its way to them. I knew it was the right thing to do, but it didn't feel like a win. If anything, it felt like I was finally putting an end to something that had been broken for years. But life doesn't pause for reflection. While my parents settled into their new financial reality, I had a company to run, a company that for the first time was entirely my own. The transition from the old company to my new venture had been smoother than I expected. Most of the staff came over willingly, and the clients that mattered stuck with us. It wasn't just loyalty. They knew the value of the relationships we built and the systems we created. If anything, the chaos surrounding Adam's downfall had only solidified their trust in me. They saw who the real driving force behind the company had been all along. One of the biggest changes I made was how we operated as a company. I learned a lot from the mistakes of the past, especially about transparency and communication. Under the old regime, decisions were often made behind closed doors, and people were left scrambling to adjust without any real explanation. I wanted to do things differently. We started having weekly all-hands meetings where I laid out everything: progress, challenges, upcoming goals. No fluff, no corporate jargon, just straight talk about where we were and where we were headed. The first few meetings were a little awkward. People weren't used to that level of openness, and I could tell some of them were waiting for the other shoe to drop. But over time, they started to relax. They started to believe me when I said we were in this together. One of the most satisfying moments came about a month in, when one of the senior developers pulled me aside after a meeting. He'd been with the company for years, one of the quiet workhorses who got things done without ever making a fuss. "Marcus," he said, "I just wanted to say thanks. I've been here a long time, and this is the first time I felt like someone actually cares about what we're doing." It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said, "That means a lot. Thank you for sticking with us." Those little moments reminded me why I was doing this. It wasn't about proving anything to Adam or Dad or anyone else. It was about building something meaningful, something that people could be proud to be a part of. By the end of the first quarter, we were not only stable but thriving. Revenue was up, client retention was at an all-time high, and we'd even started bringing in new business. The team was energized, and the office buzzed with a kind of excitement I hadn't seen in years. One day, as I was walking through the office, I overheard a couple of employees talking near the coffee machine. They didn't notice me, and I didn't interrupt. Honestly, one of them said, "This is the best thing that could have happened. The old company was such a mess. I feel like we actually have a future here." The other one nodded. "Yeah, Marcus gets it. He's not just sitting in an office barking orders. He's actually building something with us. Hearing that felt better than any award or recognition ever could. It wasn't just about the numbers or the growth. It was about the fact that people believed in what we were doing. Meanwhile, the old company was barely limping along. The lawsuits were piling up, the stock was essentially worthless, and the remaining employees were jumping ship as fast as they could. Adam, from what I heard, was trying to stay out of the spotlight, but the damage to his reputation was done. He was no longer a name anyone wanted to be associated with. By the 6-month mark, the new company had established itself as a leader in the industry. We weren't just surviving, we were innovating. We launched a new product line that streamlined logistics for small businesses, and it took off faster than we'd anticipated. It felt like everything I'd been working toward for the past 10 years was finally coming together. For years, I'd been fighting to prove myself, to Dad, to Adam, to everyone who'd ever doubted me. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I'd built something real, something that would last. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Now it's been 3 years since everything went down, and if I'm being honest, I still think about it sometimes. Not in a regretful way, but in that how did I even survive that kind of way. The whole ordeal feels like a lifetime ago, even though it fundamentally changed everything about my life. My new company, our company, is thriving. When I say thriving, I mean we've surpassed every goal I ever thought possible. The team we built after leaving the old company has grown into something I'm genuinely proud of. We're not just profitable, we're respected. People in the industry look at us as the gold standard, the kind of company others want to emulate. That feels good, not because of the recognition, but because it means we're doing things the right way. But let's be real, success doesn't erase the past. Every now and then, I'll catch myself scrolling through old emails or glancing at news articles from the fallout. Adam's name comes up occasionally, usually attached to some cautionary tale about leadership or nepotism. Last I heard, he's working in some low-level job, trying to stay under the radar. I don't keep tabs on him, but it's hard not to hear things when your name and his are still loosely connected in some circles. As for my parents, they've settled into their quiet retirement. Mom sends me emails now and then, updates about their new hobbies or the neighborhood potluck they've started hosting. Dad, though, has stayed silent. I haven't spoken to him directly since the day he signed those papers in my office. I don't think he's bitter, but I also don't think he knows how to rebuild the bridge he burned. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd let him if he tried. What's funny is how much perspective time gives you. When everything first happened, I was so focused on proving myself, on showing everyone that I was the one who deserved to lead. But now, 3 years out, I realize I don't care about that anymore. People who know me, who work with me, already understand the kind of person I am. I don't need to scream my accomplishments from the rooftops, and I certainly don't need validation from the people who doubted me. And as for those who wonder how the quiet one ended up on top, here's what I'll say. While others were busy posturing and playing politics, I was doing the work. While they were making noise, I was making plans. Because at the end of the day, success isn't about being the loudest or the flashiest. It's about strategy, resilience, and knowing exactly what you're capable of, even when no one else sees it. The peacocks may get the attention, but the eagles? We're the ones who see everything from above. And that's where the story ends, or begins, depending on how you look at it. Thanks for sticking around. Let me know if you've got questions, thoughts, or stories of your own to share.